You've been told your energy is limitless, that you can burn through your days without consequence, that modern life demands everything from you, and you should give it willingly. But what if you've been wasting your deepest source of power without even realizing it? What if the ancients understood something about human vitality that we've forgotten in our rush toward instant gratification? Tonight, we explore the hidden power of retention. Not just of thoughts or emotions, but of the very essence that creates life itself. This isn't about shame. It's about sovereignty. Before you settle into this reflection, take a moment to subscribe to the quiet mind. This may be your only chance before you drift into deep listening or even sleep. Hit that subscribe button now. Like this video. It helps you find your way back to this calm space without searching through the noise of the internet. Now, you don't need to watch the screen. Sit back, lay down, close your eyes if you wish. This video will work as your guide, whether you're awake or drifting into dreams. Let the words wash over you like gentle waves. Your subconscious is always listening. Now, in the mountains of Tibet, there's an old saying, "The river that runs backward reaches the source." For thousands of years, mystics and sages have spoken of a hidden energy that flows within us. The Chinese called it Jing. The Indians knew it as Ojas. The ancient Greeks recognized it as the vital force that separated the living from the dead. This isn't mystical nonsense. This is biology speaking through the language of wisdom. Every month, your body produces millions of sperm cells. Each one carries not just genetic information, but concentrated life force. Zinc, selenium, proteins, hormones, the building blocks of vitality itself. When you release this energy constantly, you're not just experiencing a moment of pleasure. You're trading your life force for a fleeting sensation. The ancient Taoists understood this deeply. They practiced what they called Jing conservation, the art of retaining sexual energy to cultivate inner power, not from shame, but from wisdom. They noticed something profound. Men who learned to contain this energy developed sharper minds, stronger bodies, and a presence that others could feel from across a room. Modern science is finally catching up to what the ancients always knew. Studies show that frequent ejaculation depletes crucial neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, the very chemicals that govern motivation, focus, and emotional balance. Your brain doesn't distinguish between sex and self-gratification when it comes to neurochemical rewards. Both trigger the same dopamine pathways. Both demand the same biological price. But here's what's fascinating. When you retain instead of release, your body begins to recycle this energy. Testosterone levels stabilize. Mental clarity increases. That scattered feeling that follows release, it simply doesn't come. The river runs backward. The energy returns to its source, and you begin to feel like yourself again. Have you ever noticed the difference? That subtle shift in how you move through the world when your energy is contained versus when it's scattered? Let's speak plainly about what happens in your body during retention. When semen is not ejaculated, it doesn't just disappear. Your body is remarkably intelligent. It reabsorbs these nutrients, redistributing them throughout your system. The zinc that would have been lost, it returns to support your immune system, your cognitive function, your skin health. The proteins, they become building blocks for muscle recovery and cellular repair. The hormonal precursors? They help maintain optimal testosterone levels without the post-ejaculation crash that so many men feel depleted. This isn't speculation. This is measurable biology. Dr. Taoist master Mantak Chia spent decades studying what he called seminal retention for health and longevity. His research showed that men who practiced retention displayed improved energy levels, better sleep, and enhanced mental performance. But the benefits go deeper than physiology. When you retain, you're not just conserving nutrients, you're training your willpower. Every moment you choose retention over release, you're strengthening the neural pathways associated with self-control. The prefrontal cortex, your brain's executive center, grows stronger with each act of conscious restraint. This is why ancient warriors, monks, and philosophers often practiced celibacy or retention. They understood that sexual energy and mental energy are not separate forces. They're the same energy expressed differently. Think about it. The moments after release, how does your mind feel? Foggy? Scattered? Less sharp than before? That's not coincidence. That's biology. Your brain has just been flooded with prolactin, the same hormone that makes you sleepy after a large meal. Your dopamine receptors have been overstimulated and are now downregulating. Your body is redirecting energy toward recovery rather than performance. But when you retain, the energy that would have been lost in release gets channeled upward, into focus, into presence, into that quiet confidence that others notice but can't quite name. The ancient Sanskrit texts called this urdhva ratas, the upward flow of sexual energy. Modern neuroscience calls it optimized dopamine regulation. Different words, same truth.
But retention isn't just about saying no. It's about learning to redirect this powerful energy toward something greater. The question becomes, where does all this conserved energy go? How do you transform retention into creation? This is where the ancient arts of sublimation reveal their secrets. The word sublimation comes from chemistry. It describes the process by which a solid transforms directly into a gas, skipping the liquid phase entirely. In psychology, sublimation means transforming raw instinctual energy into something refined, creative, and socially valuable. But the ancients understood this process long before we had scientific terms for it. The Hindu tradition speaks of kundalini, sexual energy rising from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, transforming into spiritual insight along the way. The Chinese Taoists mapped out specific meditation practices to move Jing energy from the sexual organs to the brain, where it could fuel mental clarity and wisdom. Even the Christian mystics, though they rarely spoke openly about sexuality, understood that celibacy could generate tremendous spiritual power when practiced with proper intention. They all recognized the same truth. Sexual energy is creative energy, and creative energy can be directed. When you retain, you're not bottling up this energy. You're creating the conditions for its transformation. Think of a river. When it flows unrestricted, it spreads wide and shallow. But when its flow is directed through a narrow channel, it gains tremendous force. Enough force to power entire cities. Your sexual energy works the same way. When it's constantly released, it dissipates. When it's retained and directed, it becomes a source of incredible personal power. But here's the key. Retention without direction creates tension. Energy without an outlet can become restlessness, irritability, even aggression. The art of sublimation is learning to give this energy conscious direction. Some men direct it into physical training. They find that retained energy makes their workouts more intense, their recovery faster, their physical presence more commanding. Others channel it into creative work. Writers, artists, musicians, and entrepreneurs often report that periods of sexual retention coincide with their most productive and inspired work. Some still use it for a spiritual practice. Meditation becomes deeper. Prayer becomes more focused. The sense of connection to something greater becomes more tangible. The specific direction matters less than the conscious choice to direct. What matters is that you're not passively experiencing this energy, you're actively working with it. The great inventor Nikola Tesla was celibate for most of his adult life. He claimed that sexual abstinence was essential to his scientific creativity. He said, "My belief is firm in the law of compensation. These things work themselves out." The artist Michelangelo rarely had intimate relationships, pouring his life force into marble and paint instead. The intensity of his art speaks to the power of sublimated sexual energy. These weren't men who feared sexuality. They were men who understood that sexual energy could be consciously transformed into other forms of creation. And they chose the transformation.
So how do you actually sublimate retained energy? How do you transform biological impulses into creative power? The ancients developed specific practices for this, techniques that modern science is beginning to validate. First, breath work. When sexual energy builds in your system, you can literally breathe it up your spine and into your brain. The Taoist practice of microcosmic orbit breathing involves inhaling while imagining energy rising from your pelvis to your crown, then exhaling while imagining it circulating back down through your body. Sounds mystical? Maybe, but the physiological effects are real. Deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, reduces stress hormones, and increases oxygenation to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for higher thinking. Second, physical movement. Retained sexual energy wants to move. If you don't give it conscious direction, it will find its own outlets, often in the form of restlessness, irritability, or eventual breakdown of your retention practice. But when you channel this energy into exercise, martial arts, dance, or even vigorous work, something beautiful happens. Your physical practice becomes more intense, more focused, more satisfying than usual. The energy that would have been dissipated in sexual release gets transformed into physical capability and presence. Third, creative expression. There's a reason why creative and procreative share the same root. The energy that creates new life and the energy that creates new art are fundamentally the same. When you retain, you can direct this creative force into any project that matters to you. Writing, music, business ventures, problem solving, building something that didn't exist before. Many men find that their most inspired work happens during retention periods. The energy that would have been dissipated in sexual release becomes available for mental and creative breakthroughs. Fourth, meditation and contemplation. The Hindu and Buddhist traditions have long understood that sexual energy can be transformed into spiritual insight. When you retain, your meditation practice often becomes more effortless, more profound. This isn't because sex is unspiritual. It's because the same life force that creates physical pleasure can create mental clarity and emotional peace when consciously directed inward. 5. Service to others. Retained energy naturally wants to flow outward in some form. When you can't release it sexually, it often finds expression through generosity, leadership, mentoring, or other forms of giving. Many men report that retention periods coincide with increased motivation to help others, to take on challenging projects, or to step up as leaders in their communities. The key to successful sublimation is finding the right combination of these practices for your temperament and circumstances. Some men need more physical outlet. Others need more creative expression. Still others find their balance through service or spiritual practice. The point isn't to follow a rigid system. It's to develop sensitivity to your own energy patterns and learn to work with them consciously. Every man who attempts retention will face moments of intense resistance, moments when the urge feels overwhelming, when the benefits seem theoretical and the desires feel urgent and real. These moments are not obstacles to overcome, they are the very mechanism through which transformation happens. The ancient Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that our greatest growth comes not from avoiding difficulty, but from meeting it with wisdom and skill. When you feel the pull toward release, what's really happening? On one level, it's biology. Your body is accustomed to a certain pattern of tension and release. When you change that pattern, your nervous system objects. This is normal. This is not failure. On another level, it's psychology. The part of your mind that seeks immediate relief is testing your commitment to longer-term benefits. This internal negotiation is where real character is forged. But there's a third level that's rarely discussed, the spiritual dimension of resistance. In many wisdom traditions, strong urges during retention periods are seen as signs that energy is being concentrated and intensified. The Taoists call this spiritual pressure, the sensation that occurs when life force accumulates rather than dissipates. This pressure isn't something to eliminate, it's something to work with skillfully. Think of it like physical exercise. The burn in your muscles isn't a sign that you're damaging yourself, assuming proper form and intensity. It's a sign that you're creating the conditions for growth. The mental pressure that comes with retention works similarly. It's your psyche's way of expanding to accommodate increased energy. But this expansion can feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, even frightening if you don't understand what's happening. The key is learning to surf these waves of intensity rather than being crushed by them. Some practical approaches. When the urge peaks, instead of fighting it directly, acknowledge it. I notice that my body wants release right now. I understand this impulse. I choose something different. This isn't suppression. Suppression tries to pretend the urge doesn't exist. Acknowledgement recognizes the urge, but maintains conscious choice about how to respond. Breathe through the intensity. Often sexual urges peak and then naturally subside if you don't feed them with fantasy or physical stimulation. Deep, slow breathing can help you ride out these peaks without reactive decision-making. Move the energy physically. Go for a walk. Do push-ups. Take a cold shower. Dance to music. Give your nervous system alternative outlets for the accumulated energy. Engage your higher mind. Read something profound. Listen to meaningful music. Have a deep conversation. Remind yourself why you're practicing retention in the first place. The goal isn't to become someone who never feels sexual desire. The goal is to become someone who feels it fully but responds to it consciously. One of the biggest mistakes men make with retention is approaching it with an all-or-nothing mentality. They decide to retain forever, or they quit entirely at the first challenge. But the Buddha taught a middle path between extreme indulgence and extreme deprivation. This wisdom applies to sexual energy as much as any other aspect of life. True mastery isn't about rigid rules. It's about conscious choice in each moment. Some men benefit from extended periods of complete retention, weeks or even months without any sexual release. They find that longer periods allow deeper benefits to develop and their energy to accumulate more fully. Others find their optimal balance includes periodic, conscious release, maybe once a week or once a month, combined with daily practices of energy conservation and sublimation. Still others practice what some traditions call retention without ejaculation, maintaining sexual activity while learning to separate orgasm from ejaculation through specific breathing and muscle control techniques. The point isn't to find the right method, the point is to find your method. the approach that increases your vitality, clarity, and sense of personal power. And your optimal approach might change over time. What serves you in your 20s might not be the same as what serves you in your 40s. What works during a creative project might not work during a relationship transition. Flexibility is not weakness. Rigidity is not strength. True strength is the ability to assess your current situation honestly and make conscious choices based on your deepest values rather than your immediate impulses. This requires developing sensitivity to your own energy patterns. How do you feel after different types of sexual experiences? How does your mental clarity change with retention? How does your emotional stability fluctuate? These are not abstract questions, they're practical inquiries that can guide you toward your own optimal balance. The ancient Chinese had a concept called Wu Wei, the idea that when you're truly aligned with natural principles, right action flows naturally without strain or forcing. When you find your authentic relationship is sexual energy, retention doesn't feel like deprivation, it feels like alignment, like working with your nature rather than against it. But finding this alignment requires honest experimentation. And honest experimentation requires willingness to make mistakes, adjust course, and keep learning. The path is not straight. The path is spiral. Each cycle teaches you something new about your own energy, your own desires, your own capacity for conscious choice. Trust the process. Trust your direct experience. Trust your capacity to learn and grow. And remember, every moment of conscious choice is a victory, regardless of whether you ultimately retain or release.
But retention isn't just a personal practice. It affects how you show up in relationships, how you connect with others, how you move through the world. This brings us to perhaps the most profound aspect of this work, the social and relational dimensions of retained energy. Have you ever met someone who seemed to radiate a quiet confidence? Someone whose presence felt solid, grounded, complete? Someone who didn't need anything from you, but whose attention made you feel more alive? This isn't charisma, it's not social skills or physical attractiveness, though it might include those elements. This is energetic presence, the kind that comes from internal fullness rather than external seeking. When you retain your sexual energy consistently, something shifts in how others perceive you. You begin to carry yourself differently, move differently, speak from a different place. This isn't mystical, this is observable. People who are not depleting their vital energy regularly tend to stand straighter, walk with more purpose, make more consistent eye contact, speak more slowly and clearly, listen more fully, interrupt less frequently, show up more present in conversations rather than mentally seeking the next source of stimulation. These changes happen naturally, unconsciously. They're not performed or practiced. They emerge from the simple fact that your energy is not scattered or depleted. In romantic relationships, this creates a profound shift in dynamics. Instead of approaching potential partners from a place of need or wanting, you approach from a place of fullness and choice. Instead of seeking completion through someone else, you offer connection from your own sense of wholeness. This fundamentally changes the quality of relationships available to you. When you're operating from energetic depletion, you tend to attract people who are also depleted. Relationships become transactions where each person is trying to get something they feel they lack. When you're operating from energetic abundance, you tend to attract people who are also abundant. Relationships become celebrations where each person is sharing from their overflow. The difference is felt immediately, even if it's not consciously understood. Think about the most memorable people you've encountered, the ones whose presence stayed with you long after they left the room. Chances are these people had something in common. They weren't trying to get something from you. They were simply present, complete in themselves, generous with their attention. This is what retained energy can cultivate in your own presence. But it also requires a fundamental shift in how you think about relationships and sexuality. Most modern sexual education focuses on technique, safety, and mutual pleasure,
These are important, but they miss something essential: the energetic dimension of sexual exchange. When you understand retention, you also begin to understand that sexual energy is not just personal, it's shared. What you bring to intimate moments affects not just your experience, but your partner's as well. Men who practice retention often report that their intimate experiences become more intense, more connected, more satisfying for both themselves and their partners. This makes sense from multiple perspectives. Physically, retention can increase sensitivity, improve stamina, and intensify the eventual experience of release when it's consciously chosen. Emotionally, retention often creates more appreciation for intimate connection. When sexual experiences are less frequent but more intentional, they tend to feel more meaningful. Energetically, retained sexual energy can be shared between partners in ways that casual release cannot. Instead of dissipating energy through quick release, couples can learn to circulate and exchange energy, creating experiences of mutual fulfillment that don't require ejaculation at all. The ancient tantric traditions understood this deeply. They developed elaborate practices for using sexual energy as a spiritual practice, a way of connecting not just with each other, but with the creative force of life itself. But you don't need to study Tantra to understand the basic principle. Sexual energy is creative energy. How you use it determines whether it creates deeper connection or temporary pleasure. This doesn't mean that all sexual experiences must be profoundly spiritual. It means that conscious choice about how you use your sexual energy affects the quality of your intimate life. When you retain, you're not avoiding sexuality. You're developing discernment about sexuality. You're learning to distinguish between sexual experiences that deplete your energy versus those that amplify it. Partners who drain your life force versus those who enhance it. Moments when sexual connection serves your highest good versus moments when it's just stress relief or entertainment. This discernment naturally leads to more satisfying intimate experiences, even if they're less frequent. Quality versus quantity. Depth versus breadth. Connection versus transaction. And your partners will feel this shift too, even if they can't articulate it. When you approach intimacy from a place of energetic fullness rather than need, everything changes. You become someone worth connecting with, rather than someone seeking connection.
But what about the practical challenges? What about the social pressures? What about navigating a world that constantly encourages immediate sexual gratification? This is where retention becomes not just a personal practice, but a form of quiet rebellion. We live in a culture that profits from your depletion. A culture that tells you happiness comes from getting what you want immediately. That self-control is repression. That discipline is outdated. That your impulses should guide your choices. This isn't accidental. It's economically advantageous for you to be constantly seeking external satisfaction. Depleted people are eager consumers. Exhausted people make poor decisions. Scattered people are easily manipulated. When you practice retention, you're quietly rebelling against this entire system. You're saying, my energy belongs to me. My choices are conscious. My satisfaction comes from internal sources, not external ones. This rebellion will be met with resistance, not just from your own impulses, but from the culture around you. Friends might mock retention as weird or unhealthy. They might pressure you to engage in behaviors that deplete your energy. They might interpret your new sense of groundedness as judgment of their lifestyle choices. This is natural. Your consistency might unconsciously remind others of their own lack of consistency. Your presence might highlight their absence. Your fullness might reflect their emptiness. This isn't your problem to solve. It's information about the transformative power of what you're practicing. The path of retention is inherently countercultural because it requires you to trust your direct experience over social conditioning. It requires you to value long-term benefits over short-term pleasures. It requires you to develop internal sources of satisfaction rather than external ones. These are revolutionary acts in a culture of instant gratification. But here's what's interesting. The men throughout history who changed the world often practiced some form of energy retention. Gandhi, Tesla, Da Vinci, many of the great artists, inventors, spiritual leaders, and social reformers understood that personal energy conservation translated into world-changing capacity. They weren't celibate because they hated sexuality. They retained because they loved something greater than immediate pleasure. They chose to channel their life force into legacy rather than momentary satisfaction. You don't have to change the world to benefit from the same principle. You just have to change your world, your daily experience, your sense of personal power, your capacity for conscious choice. But the world-changing potential is always there, quietly accumulating with every moment of retained energy. The practical reality is that you'll need to navigate social situations that encourage energy depletion. Parties where casual encounters are expected. Conversations where sexual conquest is celebrated. Media that constantly stimulates sexual desire. Cultural messages that equate masculinity with sexual frequency. How do you maintain your practice while living in this environment? First, understand that you don't need to evangelize. Your retention practice is not a crusade. It's a personal choice based on your direct experience of what increases your vitality and clarity. You don't owe anyone explanations. You don't need to defend your choices. You don't need to convert others to your approach. Simply live from your center and let the results speak for themselves. Second, develop subtle ways to redirect energy without being obvious about it. When conversations become overly sexual, you can shift topics without making others wrong. When social pressures arise, you can decline invitations without detailed justifications. "I'm focusing on other priorities right now" is often enough explanation for why you're not participating in certain activities. Third, find community with others who understand this path. This might be men's groups focused on personal development, martial arts communities, meditation circles, creative collaboratives. You don't need many people. You just need a few who understand that there's more to masculinity than immediate gratification, who value depth over breadth, who measure success by internal metrics rather than external validation. And here's what's remarkable. As you become more selective about how you use your energy, people often become more interested in spending time with you. Scarcity creates value. Presence creates attraction. You become someone whose attention means something because it's not freely given to everything and everyone.
But what happens over time? What are the long-term effects of making retention a way of life rather than just an experiment? This is where the deepest benefits reveal themselves. Changes that are felt not just in months, but in years. There's a difference between trying retention and living retention. Trying retention is what happens during the first few weeks or months. You're experimenting, testing, seeing if the benefits match the effort. Living retention is what happens when energy conservation becomes integrated into who you are. When it's no longer a practice you do, but a principle you embody. The men who reach this integration report transformations that go far beyond the physical or psychological benefits discussed in research studies. They speak of a kind of accumulated power that builds year after year. Not aggressive power or dominating power, but generative power, creative power. The power that comes from having abundant internal resources to draw upon. They describe feeling less reactive to external circumstances, more capable of maintaining emotional equilibrium during challenging periods, more able to think clearly under pressure. They talk about increased intuition, the ability to sense what's really happening in situations beyond what's explicitly communicated, to read people and environments with subtle accuracy. They report enhanced creativity that seems to flow from a source deeper than normal inspiration. Ideas that arrive fully formed. Solutions that emerge from periods of quiet contemplation. They describe relationships that feel more authentic, more nourishing, more mutually beneficial. Less drama, more genuine connection. Less seeking, more sharing. These long-term benefits make sense when you understand retention as a form of compound interest. Every day you retain, you're not just conserving that day's energy, you're adding to an accumulated reservoir that grows over time. Every month you practice, you're not just developing that month's self-discipline, you're strengthening neural pathways that support conscious choice in all areas of life. Every year you integrate retention as a lifestyle, you're not just maintaining physical vitality, you're cultivating a depth of character that becomes visible in how you handle every situation you encounter. This is why the ancient traditions emphasized retention as a lifelong practice, rather than a temporary experiment. They understood that the most profound benefits emerge slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly. Like a tree growing stronger root systems year after year, eventually able to weather storms that would topple younger trees. Like an artist developing mastery through decades of practice, eventually able to create works of beauty that were unimaginable when they first began. Like a meditator, deepening their practice year after year, eventually able to access states of consciousness that were impossible during their early attempts. The accumulated power of retention works similarly. It's not dramatic or obvious in the beginning, but over time, it creates a foundation of internal stability that supports everything else you attempt in life. Men who have practiced retention for years often describe feeling unshakable. Not because nothing challenges them, but because they have developed internal resources adequate to meet whatever challenges arise. They describe feeling more aligned with their authentic nature, less pulled by social expectations, media messages, or peer pressure. More able to make choices based on their deepest values rather than immediate impulses. This isn't spiritual bypassing or grandiose thinking. It's the natural result of having abundant internal energy available for purposes beyond basic survival and reproduction. When you're not constantly depleting your life force, that force naturally seeks expression in creative, generous, and meaningful ways.
But the long-term effects of retention extend beyond personal transformation. They ripple outward into every relationship and situation you encounter. Children sense the presence of adults who are energetically stable. They feel safer, more relaxed, more able to be themselves around men who are not scattered or depleted. Colleagues notice when you're operating from a place of internal fullness rather than external need. Projects flow more smoothly. Conflicts get resolved more easily. Leadership emerges naturally rather than being forced or performed. Friends experience you as more present, more reliable, more genuinely interested in their well-being, rather than seeking validation or entertainment from them. Partners feel the difference between someone who approaches intimacy from depletion versus someone who approaches from abundance. The quality of connection becomes richer, more satisfying, more sustainable. Even strangers respond differently to your presence. The person at the grocery store, the driver in traffic, the server at a restaurant. There's something about retained energy that communicates safety, stability, trustworthiness. This isn't about being perfect or superior, it's about being present, fully inhabiting your own life rather than constantly seeking escape from it. The ripple effects happen naturally, unconsciously. You're not trying to impact others, you're simply living from a place of energetic integrity. And that integrity influences everyone you encounter. Some men worry that retention will make them less attractive to potential partners. The opposite tends to be true. Men who have learned to contain and direct their sexual energy often become more attractive, not less. They develop what could be called magnetic presence, the quality of being interesting without trying to be interesting, confident without needing to prove their confidence, attractive without seeking to attract. This magnetic quality comes from internal fullness. When you're not seeking completion through others sense that you have something to offer rather than something to take. When you're not desperately needing validation, validation flows toward you more easily. When you're not constantly trying to get something, people want to give you things. This is the paradox of abundance. The more you cultivate internal resources, the more external resources become available to you.
Every journey begins with a single step. Every transformation starts from exactly where you are right now. If you've been releasing sexual energy frequently, whether through self-gratification, casual encounters, or even regular intimate relationships, your body and mind are accustomed to certain patterns. Changing these patterns requires patience, self-compassion, and realistic expectations. You don't begin retention by attempting to retain for months. You begin by attempting to retain for days, or even hours. You start with whatever feels challenging but achievable, then gradually extend your capacity over time. Think of it like physical fitness. If you haven't exercised in years, you don't start by trying to run a marathon. You start with a walk around the block, then a longer walk, then a short run. You build capacity gradually, respecting your current limitations while gently expanding them. Sexual energy retention works the same way. Your willpower is like a muscle. It gets stronger with consistent use, but it can be overwhelmed if you demand too much too quickly. Start with a commitment that feels slightly challenging, but definitely achievable. Maybe it's 3 days. Maybe it's a week. Maybe it's 2 weeks if you already have some experience with delayed gratification in other areas of life. The specific time frame matters less than your ability to meet the commitment you make to yourself. Success breeds success. Each time you honor a commitment to retention, you strengthen your confidence in your ability to make conscious choices about your energy. And when you do release, either because you choose to or because your retention practice breaks down, approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. What were the circumstances that led to release? What internal or external pressures were you experiencing? What might you do differently next time to extend your retention period? This isn't about perfection. This is about learning. Each retention period teaches you something about your own energy patterns, your triggers, your sources of strength and vulnerability. Over time, you develop a nuanced understanding of how your energy works, when retention serves you and when release might be appropriate, how to work with challenging urges without being overwhelmed by them, how to sublimate accumulated energy into creative and meaningful activities. This self-knowledge becomes more valuable than any external rule or rigid system.
Once you've committed to a retention period, how do you actually navigate the daily reality of this practice? Here are some practical strategies developed by men who have successfully integrated retention into their lives. Morning practice. Start each day with some form of energy cultivation rather than energy depletion. This might be meditation, breath work, physical exercise, or creative work. Beginning the day by building energy rather than scattering it sets a positive tone for everything that follows. Environmental awareness. Notice which environments, media, and social situations trigger sexual urges. You don't necessarily need to avoid all triggers, but conscious awareness allows you to enter challenging situations with preparation rather than surprise. Energy redirection. When sexual urges arise, have pre-planned alternatives ready. Physical exercise, creative projects, meaningful conversations, service to others. Give the energy somewhere constructive to flow rather than trying to suppress it entirely. Sleep hygiene. Many men find that retention is easier when they're well rested and harder when they're exhausted. Prioritizing quality sleep supports your willpower and emotional regulation during challenging moments. Nutrition support. Your body needs adequate nutrients to produce sexual energy, and it needs adequate nutrients to sublimate that energy effectively. Focus on whole foods, adequate protein, and proper hydration. Some men find that certain foods, very spicy foods, excessive stimulants, make retention more difficult. Stress management. High stress often triggers seeking behaviors, including sexual release as a form of tension relief. Developing healthy stress management practices, whether through exercise, meditation, time in nature, or creative expression, supports your retention practice indirectly. Social boundaries. You may need to adjust some social situations temporarily while establishing your retention practice. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial, but it might mean declining certain invitations or leaving situations that make conscious choice difficult. Progress tracking. Some men find it helpful to track their retention periods, energy levels, mood, and other relevant factors. This creates objective data about what approaches work best for your unique situation. Community support, whether through online forums, local men's groups, or individual friendships, connecting with others who understand this path can provide encouragement during challenging periods. Flexibility within structure. Have clear intentions about your retention practice, but hold them lightly enough to adjust based on changing circumstances. Rigid rules often lead to explosive rebellions. Flexible principles create sustainable practices. The key is finding the combination of strategies that work for your personality, lifestyle, and current life circumstances. What works for someone else might not work for you. What works for you now might need adjustment as your practice deepens or your life situation changes.
Let's be honest. Most men who attempt retention will experience periods where their practice breaks down. This isn't failure. This is part of the learning process. The question isn't whether setbacks will happen. The question is how you'll respond when they do. Some men approach retention with an all-or-nothing mentality. They set impossibly high standards, then abandon the practice entirely when they can't maintain perfection. This approach misses the point entirely. Retention isn't about achieving some ideal standard. It's about developing greater consciousness around your energy and choices. Every moment of conscious choice is valuable, regardless of whether it leads to perfect retention. Every period of successful retention builds your capacity, even if it's eventually followed by release. Every setback teaches you something about your patterns, your triggers, your areas for continued growth. The most successful retention practitioners develop what could be called resilient commitment, the ability to recommit to their practice after temporary breakdowns without self-judgment or dramatic emotional reactions. When a retention period ends, they approach it with curiosity. What were the contributing factors? Physical stress, emotional overwhelm, social pressure, boredom, hormonal fluctuations. What internal narrative preceded the release? I deserve this. I can't handle the pressure. Just this once won't matter. I'll start again tomorrow. What would have been helpful in that moment? Different environment, specific technique, emotional support, physical outlet for energy. This analysis isn't about self-criticism. It's about self-understanding. Each breakdown provides information that can make your next retention period more successful. And here's something important. Many men find that their failed retention periods are actually more successful than they initially thought. Maybe you intended to retain for 30 days, but only made it to 21. That's still 21 days of energy conservation, willpower development, and conscious choice. That's still far more retention than you would have practiced without any intention at all. Maybe you released earlier than planned, but you did it consciously rather than compulsively. You made a choice rather than being overwhelmed by an urge. That's progress, even if it's not perfect retention. The path isn't linear. The path is spiral. You circle back to similar challenges at deeper levels, developing greater capacity each time. Trust the process. Trust your ability to learn and grow. Trust that every sincere effort contributes to your overall development, even when it doesn't meet your initial expectations. As we near the end of our exploration, it's time to consider the deeper question. What does it mean to live as a man who has integrated these principles? What does retention look like, not as a practice you do, but as an expression of who you are? There comes a point in retention practice when it stops being something you do and becomes something you are. When the choice to retain energy is no longer difficult because it aligns naturally with your deepest values and priorities. When the benefits have become so integrated into your daily experience that the thought of returning to constant depletion feels as absurd as deliberately injuring yourself. This isn't about becoming rigid or puritanical, it's about becoming aligned.
about living from a place where your actions consistently support your highest well-being rather than undermining it. Men who reach this integration describe a sense of coming home to themselves, of feeling like they're finally living according to their true nature rather than being pulled around by impulses and social conditioning. They speak of a quiet confidence that doesn't need external validation, a generosity that flows from abundance rather than seeking approval, a presence that others notice but can't quite define. This integrated approach affects every aspect of life. Work becomes expression rather than obligation. When you have abundant internal energy, your professional life naturally becomes more creative, more purposeful, more aligned with your authentic interests and capabilities. Relationships become collaboration rather than transaction. When you're not seeking completion through others, you can offer genuine partnership based on mutual growth and shared values. Recreation becomes restoration rather than escape. When you're not constantly depleted, you don't need entertainment to distract you from your life. You can choose activities that actually refresh and inspire you. Challenges become opportunities rather than problems. When you have adequate internal resources, difficulties become chances to develop greater capacity rather than threats to your well-being. Sexuality becomes sacred rather than casual. When you understand sexual energy as life force, intimate experiences naturally become more conscious, more meaningful, more mutually nourishing. This doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of years of consistent practice, gradual development, and honest self-reflection. But it's available to any man willing to prioritize his energetic integrity over immediate gratification. And here's what's remarkable. Once you begin living from this place of integration, it becomes almost impossible to imagine choosing differently. Not because you're forcing yourself to maintain difficult discipline, but because the alternative, constant energy depletion, no longer appeals to you. It's like asking someone who has developed a taste for excellent food to go back to eating junk. They could do it, but why would they want to?
What does mature masculinity look like when it's informed by conscious energy management? In many cultures, masculinity is associated with conquest, accumulation, domination, the ability to take what you want when you want it. But there's another vision of masculinity that's based on cultivation, discernment, and service. The ability to generate rather than extract, to create rather than consume, to give from abundance rather than take from scarcity. This is what retention can cultivate over time. A masculinity that's generative rather than extractive. Men who embody this approach tend to become protectors rather than predators. Their strength is used to create safety for others rather than to dominate or exploit. Creators rather than consumers. They use their energy to build, make, and contribute rather than simply to acquire and accumulate. Leaders rather than followers, not through aggression or manipulation, but through the natural authority that comes from internal stability and clear purpose. Teachers rather than competitors. They're more interested in helping others develop their potential than in proving their own superiority. Collaborators rather than isolators. They understand that their individual development serves the collective good, and that collective well-being supports individual flourishing. This isn't soft masculinity or feminized masculinity. This is masculinity that has matured beyond adolescent concerns with proving itself and has evolved toward adult concerns with serving life. The energy that in youth might have been spent in sexual conquest gets redirected toward meaningful creation. The competitiveness that might have been focused on dominance gets channeled toward mastery and service.
The power that might have been used for personal gratification gets applied to problems that matter. This transformation doesn't require rejecting sexuality or becoming ascetic. It requires developing enough internal resources that your choices about sex, work, relationships, and everything else can be based on wisdom rather than need. It requires becoming full enough within yourself that you can afford to be generous with others. It requires accumulating enough energy that you can invest it in purposes larger than personal pleasure. This is the promise of retention practice, not just better self-control, but a fundamentally different relationship with your own power and purpose. Men who have integrated retention often find themselves naturally drawn toward activities that serve something larger than personal interests. This isn't forced altruism or guilty obligation. It's the natural expression of having abundant internal resources. When your basic needs for pleasure, validation, and stimulation are met through internal practices rather than external seeking, you have energy available for bigger concerns. Some men channel this into mentoring younger men who are struggling with the same challenges they once faced. Others pour their retained energy into creative projects that contribute beauty, truth, or utility to the world. Still others apply their accumulated vitality to solving practical problems in their communities, families, or professional fields. The specific form of service matters less than the underlying shift from extraction to contribution. From asking, "What can I get?" to asking, "What can I give?" From seeking to be fulfilled to seeking to be useful. From trying to satisfy yourself to trying to serve life. This is perhaps the ultimate benefit of retention. It can transform you from someone who needs the world to serve you into someone who is capable of serving the world. And this service doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like the natural expression of who you are when you're operating from energetic abundance. The ancient concept of dharma, life purpose, or righteous duty becomes accessible when you have sufficient internal resources to think beyond immediate personal needs. The Stoic ideal of living according to virtue rather than pleasure becomes attractive when you've discovered the deeper satisfaction that comes from conscious energy cultivation. The religious call to love and serve others becomes practical when you've developed enough internal fullness that giving doesn't deplete you. Retention, practiced consistently over years, can become a gateway to living from your highest potential rather than your lowest impulses. Not because someone told you that you should, but because direct experience has shown you that it's more satisfying to live from abundance than from scarcity, more fulfilling to create than to consume, more meaningful to serve than to be served. Every morning, you wake up with a choice. You can live this day from depletion or from cultivation. You can scatter your energy or concentrate it. You can seek external stimulation or develop internal resources. You can follow the path of immediate gratification or the path of accumulated power. This choice isn't dramatic. It's not announced with fanfare or marked by grand gestures. It's made in quiet moments, in the space between impulse and action, in the decision to turn toward consciousness rather than compulsion. It's made when you feel the pull toward easy release and choose the harder path of retention. When you feel the urge for instant pleasure and choose the delayed satisfaction of accumulated energy. When you feel the pressure to conform to cultural expectations and choose to align with your deeper values instead. These moments of choice are where character is forged, where transformation happens, where boys become men and men become themselves.
Each choice builds upon the previous ones. Each retention period strengthens your capacity for the next one. Each act of conscious energy management deepens your trust in your own ability to direct your life force wisely. Over weeks, this becomes a practice. Over months, this becomes a habit. Over years, this becomes who you are. The man who has learned to work consciously with his sexual energy, who understands that his vital force is precious and treats it accordingly, who makes choices based on long-term well-being rather than immediate impulse. But it all starts with today's choice, this moment's decision. Will you continue living from energetic scarcity, constantly seeking the next fix, the next release, the next external source of satisfaction? Or will you begin the quiet revolution of reclaiming your power, conserving your energy, and discovering what becomes possible when you stop dissipating your life force? The choice is always yours. The power is always within you. The question is, what will you choose? But the ripple effect extends beyond your immediate circle. It reaches into the future. The man who learns to consciously manage his sexual energy often becomes someone that younger men naturally seek out for guidance and mentorship. There's something about energetic stability that draws people who are struggling with their own impulses and scattered attention. Young men who grow up around fathers, uncles, teachers, or mentors who embody conscious energy management learn that there are alternatives to the instant gratification model promoted by popular culture. They see that masculinity can be about cultivation rather than conquest, about depth rather than breadth, about quality rather than quantity. They learn through observation that strength can be quiet, power can be contained, and satisfaction can come from internal sources rather than external achievements. This learning happens unconsciously, through presence and example, rather than lectures or rules. Boys and young men absorb the energy of the adult males around them. When those men are operating from depletion, constantly seeking stimulation, frequently depleted, reactive to their circumstances, the young men learn that this is normal masculine behavior. When those men are operating from abundance, calm in their presence, generous in their attention, responsive rather than reactive, the young men absorb this as their template for mature masculinity. Your choice to practice retention doesn't just change your life. It potentially influences every young person who encounters you during their formative years. It becomes part of their unconscious programming about what's possible for human beings in terms of self-mastery, energy management, and conscious living. This is one of the profound responsibilities and opportunities of choosing the path of retention. You become an elder, a model, a quiet teacher for the next generation, not through what you say, but through who you are. Not through rules you impose, but through possibilities you demonstrate. Your integrated practice of energy conservation becomes part of their understanding of what mature masculinity looks like. And they carry that understanding forward into their own choices, relationships, and eventual influence on others. This is how cultural transformation happens. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one generation learning from the example of the previous generation. There's an ancient philosophical concept called the eternal return. The idea that the choices we make echo through time, repeating their effects infinitely. Whether or not you believe in literal eternal recurrence, there's wisdom in asking,
If I had to live this day, make these choices, embody this approach to energy and consciousness forever, would I be satisfied with what I'm creating? The path of retention invites this kind of eternal perspective. When you choose to conserve and consciously direct your sexual energy, you're not just making a temporary change. You're aligning with principles that have guided human development for thousands of years. The same principles that allowed ancient sages to develop profound wisdom. The same principles that enabled great artists to channel their life force into enduring works of beauty. The same principles that permitted spiritual masters to transcend ordinary limitations of consciousness and capability. These principles don't change with fashion or technology. They're based on fundamental realities of human energy, consciousness, and development. When you align with them, you're participating in something eternal, something that connects you with the deepest traditions of human excellence and self-cultivation. Your daily choice to retain rather than release becomes part of an ancient lineage of men who understood that sexual energy is sacred energy, that vital force is precious, that conscious choice is the foundation of all transformation. This perspective can sustain you during challenging moments, when the urges feel overwhelming, when social pressure feels intense, when the benefits seem distant. Remember that you're not just practicing a technique. You're participating in the timeless human project of consciousness development. You're contributing to the eternal conversation about what it means to live wisely, to use energy consciously, to align actions with highest values. Every moment of retention connects you with every man throughout history who chose cultivation over dissipation, who chose depth over superficiality, who chose meaning over pleasure. You're not alone in this practice. You're part of an invisible community that spans cultures and centuries. Men who understood that true power comes from within, that satisfaction comes from alignment, that fulfillment comes from service to something greater than personal gratification. And now, as this reflection draws to its close, we return to silence, to the quiet space from which all transformation emerges. In this stillness, you can feel the choice before you, the invitation to begin or deepen your practice of conscious energy cultivation. In the stillness that follows understanding, something shifts. You realize that this isn't just information you've received, it's an invitation you must answer. The ancient wisdom, the modern science, the practical benefits, the deeper transformations, all of it points toward a single choice. Will you reclaim your vital energy, or will you continue giving it away unconsciously? This choice cannot be made in theory. It can only be made in practice. Starting tomorrow morning, starting with this moment, starting with the simple recognition that your energy belongs to you, that your life force is precious, that your choices shape not only your experience, but your character. The path of retention is not about perfection. It's about direction. Not about rigid rules, but about conscious choice. Each day you retain is a day you strengthen your capacity for self-mastery. Each moment you choose cultivation over dissipation is a moment you align with your deepest nature. Each time you redirect sexual energy toward creative expression, you participate in the ancient art of transformation. Your practice of retention becomes a quiet revolution, not announced with fanfare, not requiring anyone else's permission or approval, simply the daily choice to conserve your vital energy and direct it consciously, to live from abundance rather than scarcity, to act from wisdom rather than impulse, to serve life rather than merely satisfying yourself. This is how the world changes, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of conscious energy management at a time. You don't need to convince anyone else. You don't need to preach or evangelize. You simply need to embody what becomes possible when a man learns to work skillfully with his deepest source of power. Others will notice. They'll sense the difference in your presence, even if they can't name it. Your calmness, your focus, your generous attention, your quiet confidence. These qualities emerge naturally from energetic abundance, and they become a gift to everyone whose life you touch. Carry this silence into tomorrow. Subscribe to the Quiet Mind. Return to this space whenever you need reminding that your energy is sacred, your choices matter, and your life force can be consciously cultivated. Let your energy work quietly within you. Let your practice speak through your presence. Let your retention become your revolution. The power was always within you. Now, use it wisely.